The People's Platform.
Good evening and welcome to tonight's edition of the People's Platform. We are continuing our conversation on nutrition. Tonight's topic will specifically try to connect the ill effects of poor nutrition on health, education and human capital. I'm so pleased to welcome to the studio Dr. Pulasthi Amarasinghe, Research Economist, Institute of Policy Studies. Good evening and welcome to the show, Pulasthi.
Good evening.
Pulasthi, first, I'd like you to give us an overview of food consumption patterns. I mean, since all the crises that we've had, that has changed. So if you could give us an overview of the food consumption patterns and how it has had an effect on health and education.
Yeah, so since the pandemic and the economic crisis, food consumption patterns have changed drastically. People have moved away from their traditional meals to looking at options that are less expensive, less quality in terms of the nutrients they have, and also reducing consumption in general, either through reduced number of meals or through the number of items in your food plate. And of course, these have big effects on nutrition when it comes to individuals and even children acquiring the daily requirements when it comes to calories, macronutrients such as carbohydrates and proteins. And of course, these have larger effects or short-term and long-term effects when it comes to health and education, specifically when it comes to general human capital, or basically acquiring skills for students. You know, these are having good nutrition is a key source to improve these, this human capital accumulation for these students. And of course, for adults too, there are major health effects in non-communicable diseases and also in their general labor productivity as well.
So as a result of the multitude of crises that Sri Lanka has had to go through, people have resorted to negative food coping strategies. Can you take us through these?
Yeah. So most households, by negative food coping strategies, what's meant are relying on less preferred foods, less quality foods, or relying on borrowing from other sources to consume food. So for example, 54% of Sri Lankans are in debt, and of that 54%, around 22 to 23% are in debt due to food requirements for their food, basically cost requirement related to their food. And there are other factors such as reducing the number of meals, moving from 3 meals to 2 meals, or cutting down on other certain sources of energy such as vegetables, fruits, or proteins like meats and fish. And of course, these are considered negative because you are reducing consumption and at the cost of basically high expenditures, right? So in Sri Lanka, I think DCS, the Department of Census and Statistics, they found that in their recent surveys that 99% of households saw an increase in their food expenditures. However, we are seeing reduced consumption despite the increase in these expenditures, simply due to food shortages and increases in food prices due to these constant economic and political and economic shocks that are happening in the country.
So what happens when the composition of meals changes and we move to, say, eating more carbs and reducing the protein and vitamin and mineral content in our meals?
Yeah, so that's a very, very relevant question to what's happening today in Sri Lanka. So carbohydrate consumption is, of course, it is one of the essential nutrients, or one of the macronutrients that are essential for human consumption. But however, excessive consumption is associated with high blood sugar, weight gain, and also the risk of heart disease. Basically, all these factors that are contributing to such high non-communicable disease in Sri Lanka. I think 81% of the deaths in Sri Lanka are associated with non-communicable diseases. So diabetes and heart attacks and things of this nature. So there is a connection between carbohydrates, high consumption of carbohydrates, and long-term health effects. And of course, losing other nutrients, for example, reduction in fish consumption. Or meat consumption, and these are going to have effects, let's say, for growing children, without the lack of protein. They are likely to experience something called growth faltering at first, which are short-term fallbacks in their growth trajectories. However, these could develop into more long-term problems such as wasting, which is being underweight, and stunting, which is having a low height for their age. So there are long-term effects for both adults and children, and there are effects that goes to children in schools, right? So if you look at teenagers, this low consumption of iron could have effects in their education in terms of low concentration, and we are seeing slightly higher dropouts of males, or especially after their O-levels, students tend to drop out, especially male students. You could attribute some of these towards difficulty to keep up or difficulty to pay attention in class, and these could tend to reduce their enrollment education, and education has been affected post economic crisis, especially with the way households have spent money on these facilities.
Pulasthi, all of this is terrifying and shocking. You've researched on this particular topic. Speak to us more on some of the other findings from your study.
Yeah. So when we looked at these, what we want to see is how these costs of nutrition and cost of not just nutrition, calories have changed across the post pandemic years to now. And what's important to study is how people are changing their behaviors when it comes to food consumption. For example, in economics, we have something called elasticities, which basically capture the responsiveness of your demand to certain types of changes. For example, changes in the prices of goods, changes in your income, also changes in other goods. For example, if there's a change in prices of fish, would that affect the changes in your demand for meat? Basically, there's substitution effects going on, there's complementarities going on. All of these are important at a time like this, especially since we are talking about increases in food prices, and these seem to continue to happen in this economic environment. And are people switching from quality food sources to less quality food sources? These can be captured in our studies using these ideas called cross-price elasticities. Are they decreasing their consumption due to higher prices? These can be captured using price elasticities, which look at the demand changes in demand due to increases in food prices, in their own food price. And of course, income. We also saw around 50 or 60% of households, having some sort of an income shock, in the sense that they lost income or there were disruptions to their work. And are these going to have an impact on food consumption? And what we see is they do, right? So these are captured through income elasticities, where households respond by reducing their consumption, basically, reducing the number of meals, reducing money spent on somewhat of luxury or expensive quality food, and moving towards more less expensive food like rice or bread, things of that nature, where you can easily procure these food items. And this is what we have seen, and of course we are trying to connect these to these behaviors, and how upcoming, or how these new economic shocks and new taxes and things of that nature are going to affect prices more, and as a result change these food consumption behaviors.
All right. We'll continue the conversation with Dr. Pulasthi Amarasinghe after this commercial break. Stay with us.
The People's Platform.
TV1. TV for life.
Ranil possesses the qualities necessary to lead the country, but UNP lacks mandate and organizational strength, says Basil, while hinting at SJB, SLPP and the UNP joining together. MP faction ready to bring resolution to dissolve parliament, reveals Dulles. Jathika Janabalavegia informs IMF mission that agreements will be reviewed. Handunetti claims IMF representatives were not at President's meeting. The immunoglobulin supplier also provided substandard cancer medication. Startling revelations in court.
TV1. TV for life.
The People's Platform.
Welcome back. You're watching the People's Platform. We're discussing the ill effects of poor nutrition vis-a-vis health, education and human capital. I'm in conversation with Dr. Pulasthi Amarasinghe, who's a research economist at the Institute of Policy Studies. Pulasthi, let's talk a bit about the current policies that are in place that impact nutrition directly and indirectly.
So, in terms of current policies, there are several that you could argue are adding to the current problems when it comes to nutrition. For example, the current VAT exemptions when it comes to flour. So this, of course, from the government's perspective, they are trying to meet the calorie needs of the citizens by offering low and cheaper quality food, simply because it's more affordable, and these sort of actions could have long-term effects when it comes to health. As we discussed, more excessive consumption of carbohydrates will have impacts when it comes to blood sugar, weight gain, heart disease. So these things you could expect to see these things happen if Sri Lankans continue to base their whole meals around flour and carbohydrate-based foods, and of course there's this recent restriction on the size of bread. It was around 500 grams, I believe, and while these are designed to make sure that Sri Lankans get their the basic calorie needs met, the source of the composition of these calories will be a concern in the long run, because once again a large percentage of these calories are going to come from these carbohydrate based foods, and there isn't a huge focus on vegetables, fruits. I think some of the recent studies looking at post-COVID consumption by Dr. Pumika Surya, they have seen that most households, there was a huge decrease in the vegetable and fruit portions, and also the rate of consumption, right? How often they consume. So these will continue to happen if carbohydrates are promoted as the way to obtain calories, and of course, I understand, the difficulties are there with the government trying to, or basically everyone trying to meet the basic dietary, the calorie requirements. But of course, the quality of these calories tend to be low and could have huge health cost and to the government and the individuals as well when it comes to health outcomes.
Of course, I mean, in another 5-10 years, we're looking at another crisis, right, in terms of health and nutrition?
Yeah, so these health costs or health outcomes take time. So in the short run, the objectives will be to make sure that no one's hungry. However, in the long run, we could be looking at adding to the current huge medical cost that's coming from NCDs, right? So we have universal healthcare, and a lot of people get medicine for diabetes and other related diseases that you can attribute to poor dietary habits, right? So if these continue, we could be looking at adding to the existing large health costs, and of course individual health as well. That will deteriorate if carbohydrates and other poor, or not, I wouldn't say poor, but if balanced meals aren't considered as the future, basically.
So what's being done to curb the ill effects of this crisis?
So at the moment, it is understandable that nutrition takes a backseat. So basically, it wouldn't necessarily be a first order condition for most people because they are trying to meet the basic caloric needs, right? So to make sure people aren't starving. Exactly, right? To make sure people aren't starving. So in that sense, the nutrition or the food composition takes a back seat, and of course there are financial constraints for all individuals, for all stakeholders involved in this process, not just consumers, not just households. It's also the government as well. So there are major constraints in improving protection in these areas, providing these safety nets when it comes to procuring quality foods. However, there are things that can be done from both. There are households that are growing their own food. However, this is somewhat of inconsistent practice, or not inconsistent. It's not widely used by most households. There are restrictions, for example, mostly in urban areas where you don't have access to gardens, and areas where you can grow your own food. These individuals are going to be highly affected, and these will have long-term effects if we don't address these immediately.
So what are some of the best practices that we can also adopt? Because now, for example, this concept of community gardens, school gardens, and also, I don't know, practice of bartering. I mean, if you have a belly tree and you get like 100 fruit, you can distribute it amongst your neighbors. But I don't know, is there such a practice where we can sort of engage in some communal exercise to exchange food as a last resort, since, I don't know, if the state isn't really doing much?
Yeah, so in terms of adapting to the current environment, it seems like, at least from the recent Department of Census Statistics surveys looking at the post-economic climate, it seems like households did respond that they are participating in growing their own food, and reducing consumption in general, and there were poor dietary habits before COVID as well. But at the moment there isn't enough evidence to say that reductions in consumption are necessarily good, but there are practices taken by households to grow food, but although it's not as widespread, but there are other things that you can do, like you say with schools, providing meals to students, and it was found that this was actually a reason for students to come to school.
Of course,
right? Yeah. So providing a good quality meal, having one egg, even though it's expensive and it probably it's not covered by the current cost, the budgets that are given to the schools. Thinking about multiple benefits that you can have by policies such as school lunches, increasing school attendance. You can see that mostly in these estate sectors where people are heavily impacted. People with low incomes are more likely to be affected by the current situation. So these can happen, and of course, working. The government, there could be coordination among some of the government departments when it comes to, prioritizing health or including nutrition. For example, when it comes to agriculture, the support systems that are there for farmers to, provide food. It could, have a nutritional aspect where you focus on the dietary or the nutritional needs of the country that are missing right now.
So, Pulasthi, this conversation around nutrition has to be mainstreamed, and it's not being done at the moment, right?
So yes, so I agree with that. So nutrition, this is going to have big long-term impacts if we have the current dietary habits, and and it's difficult to change simply because the priority is not to look at a balanced meal. It's more towards finding enough food to not stay hungry. However, and people are substituting away, as expected, from these vegetables and fruits. It could force weather, climate shocks, and there's a whole lot of things that are affecting the supply side of things, and of course making sure that these there are systems in place to make facilitate the supply side so that they can provide food or nutritional food at cheaper price would probably be the main idea. But for in terms of pushing this, it is somewhat difficult due to financial constraints, both for farmers, the government, and basically everyone involved. However, we do need to start a discussion about what are some of the smaller things that we can do, or some things that can be done across multiple disciplinaries, education, agriculture. This remains a major topic. Let's say school. So
at the other end of the spectrum, we have business establishments, hotels, supermarkets that also are party to a lot of food waste. So a lot of good food goes to waste, and there is no mechanism or methodology to ensure that before the food goes bad, we utilize it in some manner or form. In other countries, in developed countries, we see this happening.
Yeah, so it'll be somewhat difficult to, given the constraints we are facing right now. This requires both private and public, partnerships for this to happen.
Yeah.
Right. So, private, institutions taking part in this, working with Sri Lankans, basically households, or even small organized small restaurants to make sure that they are able to afford provide healthy and food that are not very expensive, basically. And we do see high consumption in these small restaurants when it comes to prepared foods. However, the nutritional side, it's somewhat lacking in the way the food's prepared, and there could be some discussion between these all these private groups coming together and with to meet some of the nutritional needs of the country, basically.
Finally, for my final question, what more needs to be done by the state in terms of coherent action? I'm aware that there are methodologies in place, and there are various stakeholders that have been tasked with this particular aspect. We had a similar conversation yesterday as well with Visakha Tilakaratna, food and nutrition technologists. So speak to us about some of the more coherent measures that can be taken.
So One thing is looking at these different departments by the state. If we look at the support system that are in place for farmers right now, there are quite few, and including nutrition. Basically trying to meet the nutritional needs of the country by supporting certain, by focusing on certain types of food and supporting farmers to grow these foods and provide them at a lower cost would be one of the major ideas that that can be undertaken by the government, of course with policy and private partnerships coming into play, and of course looking at some of the previous policies when it comes to school lunches. These I believe that these should be continued, and to make sure that students are given a meal as one also to increase school attendance, but also from a nutritional aspect, so that there aren't major health and labor productivity concerns later on, right? So because later health outcomes are going to affect their productivity when they enter the workforce. So these are some of the two major ones that I think that can be done right now. Of course, the major concern once again is that nutrition is not a primary concern, in that people are trying to just not stay hungry and meet their caloric needs.
Yeah, and I think correspondingly, we as citizens also have a responsibility to equip ourselves with the knowledge regarding the food we eat.
Yes. So that's also a very good point, right? So in terms of, if you look at most of the restaurants right now, or small restaurants, there's a high consumption of bread and kottu and these other food items that are basically adding to the the problems of excessive carbohydrate consumption.
Yeah.
And of course there are other issues with time it takes to prepare foods. This is something that you probably see a lot in urban areas. You do the time it takes to prepare foods, that's causing people to rely on all these prepared foods by restaurants, and that adds to these nutritional problems, and people are moving away from home cooked meals to other meals, and equipping ourselves with this knowledge about the sources of calories and where how these are affecting our long term health outcomes, productivity, and human capital in general is very important.
All right. Thank you very much for this conversation, Dr. Pulasthi Amarasinghe, Research Economist, Institute of Policy Studies. Thank you for watching us. We'll see you again tomorrow. Carol Tozer will be joining us. Good night.